In this video, we're going to introduce the concept of a dashboard in spreadsheets. When you're driving a car, the dashboard gives you key information about the performance of the vehicle as it's driving down the road. It doesn't tell you everything about what's going on in the engine or in the transmission, but it tells you some of the most important things that the driver needs to know, just in case there's a problem that comes up, or things like their current speed. We can do something similar in a spreadsheet. We can create a dashboard that summarizes key information for the user. By doing this, it prevents the user from getting bogged down with having too much information to have to look through all at once. This is the dashboard that we will end up with at the end of our time together. To get here, through the rest of this video, we'll walk through step by step how to end up with this as our final product. The point of this practice is to take this information here and be able to summarize a single row of data on a dashboard for a user to access easily. Let's dive into it. So here we have a sheet with some information about salespeople at a company. It has some information about each person, their age, gender, where they live, their phone number, and then a history of how much sales that person has generated over the last 5 years. We're going to create a very simple dashboard that allows us to summarize information for just one salesperson on the dashboard and highlight all of the information that we have in the background for that particular selected person. To get started, let's name this sheet Data. And then we'll create a new sheet and we'll call it Dashboard. We usually start with the dashboard sheet all the way to the left because in English we read from left to right. And let's take a look at what the data is that we would want to pull back. If we have a particular salesperson, say Alice, and we want to pull this row of information back into the dashboard, let's take a look at how we might do that. To make things easier for us, we can create some named ranges. So before we get going, let's name this person. And then we'll come over to our dashboard. And the first thing that we need to do is have an input cell. And I like to modify this format sometimes. And so today let's do maybe a light yellow, and we'll make the font a little bit larger than usual. We'll choose a regular dark color for the font. And I like the font Arial. It's a very simple, clean font. So we'll click OK here. And now we need to add some data validation. Often on a dashboard, it's easiest for the user if they don't have to already know the name of the salesperson, but instead they could pick that from a drop-down list. So to do that, we'll go up here to Data. We'll choose Data Validation. We want to allow a list, and the list, we just type equals, and then that named range we created is called Person. So we'll click OK. And now we have a list of salespeople to choose from. We'll name this cell Selected. And now we can quickly reference whoever the selected salesperson is to look up their information on the next sheet. I find one easy way to start a dashboard if you know all of this information that you want to pull back is to just copy the headings from that other sheet. And we can just paste them in right here as a value. Now there are a number of different lookup functions that you can use in Excel. There's VLOOKUP, sometimes HLOOKUP. There's an index and match combination formula. There's an XLOOKUP formula. Many ways to correctly pull back information onto a dashboard. Today, I will demonstrate just one of those, but I encourage you to please go out and search online for how to use some of those additional methods. Please do not feel like just because I am demonstrating this particular method in this particular video that is the only acceptable method for this class. In this example, I'm going to use something called the offset function. And what offset function does is it starts in one particular cell, and then you choose the number of rows down, or if it's a negative number, the number of rows up that it should move, and the number of columns to the right, or if it's a negative number to the left, that particular reference should move over to. So as an example here, if I choose the starting cell as year 5 here, I choose to move 0 rows, and then I choose to move -2 columns, it's returning year 3. In this case, we're going to choose an offset, and our reference will be over here on this top cell, and we'll use F4 to anchor that position. The number of rows is going to be determined by an embedded match formula. So the lookup value will be the selected person. We're going to look it up in this array of persons that we've created here. And then we're going to choose an exact match. Next, for the column, we're going to look up, again using a match function, but this time the lookup value will be what we have on the dashboard here. The lookup array will be these headers right here. And then again, the match type will be 0. There are optional parameters of height and width. In this case, we're going to leave those blank for simplicity's sake. When we press enter, you'll see it now pulls back Carl's age as 50. There we go. When we use functions in Excel, our goal is to not have to edit them multiple times. So if I drag this formula across, we see that it's kept with 50 the entire time. So we have to figure out, why is it not referencing gender when it moves to the next cell? And the reason is because we did not anchor properly our lookup array here. If we go back here, we didn't want to anchor the dashboard reference of C5, but we do want to reference this array the same every single time. So if we have that anchored, now when we drag it across, we'll be able to see every bit of information from the previous sheet. The other thing that we can do to make our life a little bit easier is we can use the format painter here to make sure that we get the right number format. Now we have all of the information about our selected salesperson on the dashboard. The next step is to take the time to lay out that dashboard in a way that makes it easy for the user to see whoever's information that we pick quickly and grouped categorically. So we'll start by creating a section called Personal Information. And then we'll create another section down here called Contact Information. And then we'll create another section over here called Sales Contribution. To make these formats consistent, we can use some of these cell styles here. And let's just choose, if we make personal information, which will be age and gender, we may want to choose heading 3 here. And so what I like to do is we'll just move these two down over here. We'll drag age up to the top as the first bit of information, and then gender here, and we can drag these formulas that we've created into their specific position. We'll do the same thing here for home state of Idaho in this case, and then phone number down here. And of course, we're making a very simple dashboard here. Usually contact information would include their entire address, but for purposes of this demonstration, we'll just use their home state. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll pull this sales contribution data right down under here. We can start to format these things. If we hold the control key, we can select multiple areas at once and choose heading 3. So now all of these are formatted similarly in terms of their heading information. The next thing that we can do is make this row height a little bit taller so that it stands out a bit. And we do want this cell to be a bit wider. But if we do that, we run the risk of making these columns inconsistent. So what we can do instead, we have a few different options. One, we can use the merge and center feature. Another option is if we press Control 1, we choose alignment on a horizontal alignment here, center across selection. And if we click OK, we'll see that it's centered across the selection, but the drop-down still remains in the leftmost cell. So in this instance, the merge and center feature is going to be our best option. And we'll just make sure that we have the input style applied. On a dashboard, we want to make sure that we're following the standards of professionalism. And so the way that we can do that here is we'll choose the view, we'll hide the grid lines. I'm going to make the first column width 4, and then we have a bunch of extra rows in here that we may not need, so we'll delete these extra rows. Sales contribution ends up being one of the most important pieces of information in this particular example, and so one of the things that we'll do is that we'll move these sales contribution numbers up in terms of their importance. I'm also noticing here there's an extra bit of formatting here, so I don't want that to be formatted as heading 3. Instead, I'll just do normal. Now these pieces of information here, contact information and personal information, we may want to put some borders around those. You'll notice that this phone number doesn't quite fit all of the way here. So what we can do is move both of these columns to be a little bit wider. We can also align these so that they're all on the left. Next, what I like to do is put a border around. Now you'll notice here that if I put a border around, it will be right on top of all of this information here. Instead, what we can do is actually give it a little bit more space. So if, for example, I move this personal information down just a bit and I move it over, I can select all around it like this, one extra cell as an extra border. When I click this pop-out button here, I can choose borders, and then we can use whatever color border we might want around it. Now what this means is that we have to change some other things around our dashboard because that's a lot of extra space around this particular information. So while you're building dashboards, it's always important to be aware of how do we make it fit nicely and look aesthetically pleasing. If we do the same thing for contact information here, take one extra cell around the whole thing, we can press Control 1, choose that same gray color, do an outline border, just like that. Now we may want to move the drop-down list over so that as we make these two columns a little bit narrower, maybe choose 4 again, and we make these two a little bit wider, maybe choose 14 this time, you can see we've got enough space to see everything clearly. Next, for sales contribution, what we may want to do is do some calculations based on these particular numbers that we have. What we can do for that, for example here, we may want to include what is their best year, so top year. We may want to include their average, and as another piece of information, we may also want to include the standard deviation, typically abbreviated as STDEV. And standard deviation just measures the variability around the average. At the bottom, we may also include their worst year. And here we can use some simple functions to look these up. So their top year would be the max of this particular range, close parenthesis. Their average of that entire range can be calculated with that formula. And then there's actually a standard deviation formula. There are 2 of them, stdev.p for population and stdev.s. I won't go into the statistics behind this, but you should almost always choose the S option. And then the worst year would be calculated with min. And we'll use the format painter here. So to include a chart of his sales, we'll select the sales information, we'll choose Insert, and in this case we'll choose a line chart. Now there are a number of existing format styles here, and if we hover over them, we can see what they might look like. The most important thing to do when selecting a chart style or when styling a chart on your own is to figure out what information is needed on the chart and what elements are maybe duplicative or not needed. For example, because we show the sales amount here on this axis, we don't need to label each data point. We also have listed out above here each of those data points in a table view in case you want to see the specific numbers. The chart here is more used to see what the trend of those numbers is. As always, we want to add labels to our horizontal axis and to our vertical axis. We can call these sales. And down here, we could label this time, but because each point is labeled as year 1, year 2, year 3, 4, and 5, it actually would be duplicative to have a title. So in this particular instance, we can get rid of that. Another thing we may want to do is add markers to this line. So if we press Control 1 while we have the line selected, it pulls up our formatting options here. And let's choose that we want the line to be maybe a little bit thinner. We'd like a marker to be built in, and we'd like a circle marker. We'll make the size of that 7, and then we can choose the fill as a solid fill color, and I'm just going to choose white here. We'll use a solid line on the border, making it the same size as our line at 1.5 and the same color of our line. And so now as we click away from it, you can see we have a nice visible trend between the actual point and the trajectory it took to get to the next point. We can label the chart 5-year sales history. Now these are some summary statistics about this particular person's sales. So we may call this summary statistics. So we'll go with summary sales statistics. And again, we'll use that same heading style here, heading 3, across both of those columns. We'll do the same thing where we add a border around the outside. And I'm going to move these two down to make room for this right here at the top. Now if we want, we can align this chart here to be in line with our sales contribution data right here. That may be a little bit too narrow for us. What we can do is we can make these columns a little bit wider, let's say 12, and we'll make these columns here on the sides a little bit more narrow, let's say 4. And now when we create that offset of one cell around the entire thing for our border, we'll choose our same gray border, choose outline, click OK. We don't actually need a border around the chart as well, so we can remove the shape outline here and say no outline. Some other things we can do to tighten this up a bit might include changing the column widths so that things are aligned more nicely. We could actually also hide all of these rows down here off to the side and all of these columns off to the right, so that way, if you choose column width of 0, it's the same thing as hiding it. That way we have a dashboard here. So it's very clear that if we pick a different salesperson, we're able to see what their information is for that particular person. I think there are a couple of other things that we can do to tighten up this dashboard and make it look the best that it possibly can. One of those is we should always let people know on a dashboard who should they contact if they have questions, and when was the data updated. So we'll add a note here at the bottom that says data last updated August of 2021. And depending on what this is, you may also want to include what date and what time. In this case, since we're looking at years worth of history, a month is a common time. And then we'll say contact person at email.com with any questions. That way, whoever's using this data will know here's where I should ask questions if I have them. You can also use this explanatory text here feature to kind of make that fade into the background. Another thing that we can do is we should have the company's name here at the top, or we could put it above our drop-down list. So for example, if we insert a row right here and we choose company sales history by associate, we can format that using this heading format. So if we select all of these columns across the top, choose heading, and then choose to left align, we can see a very clear title here at the top. If the company had a logo, which in this case it does not, we could include that logo here at the top, and that would help make it look additionally even more professional. The last change I'll make on this is the width of this input box does not match the width of these other boxes here. To help it look consistent, if we add that same look and feel here where we choose input and then we choose to merge and center across all of those, it makes it look a little bit more complete and planned out as we take a step back and look at the whole dashboard. Like many other things in Excel, dashboards are a matter of personal preference. And so a lot of the principles that I've gone over here you can apply in different ways depending on what it is that you're trying to present. In this case, we wanted to make sure that we could summarize on a single page the information for a given associate. We want the user to be able to quickly pick a name from the list and then be able to see the updated data for that particular associate without having to flip through every row of the data in the background. As you build out your own dashboards, please keep in mind that readability and usability should be top of the list in terms of making sure that it works not just for you as the developer of the dashboard, but for whoever the intended user is.